Moving on, we're going to do this. This is a response to a colleague in another state at another institution who runs math and science learning communities. I didn't ask if I could use their name in this thing, so I don't want to name them directly. Not that it's probably a problem, but I'd rather be safe. And so this is just me. I'm playing this video in the background to show how mad I am at myself for this error. But we're going to move on. Okay, bye. Get rid of that guy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over and we're going to talk about, actually, let me put the PowerPoint up. Okay, so I wanted to record this just in case there are further inquiries, because this is a common project for me to talk about and frame and discuss the planning of. I use it in multiple combinations of learning communities and have for years now. And so I wanted to kind of, I wanted to make sure and answer this person's questions, and also maybe it'll give me a couple snippets of things that are useful resources for others too. So, maybe I was going to say something dumb in the previous video that I just spent an hour live streaming. Maybe this is better. It gave me a chance to rehearse and not just to fly off the handle. That's not how that expression works. We're going to move forward. Official start time here. Cool. I'll find that later. All right. So when we're talking about the kids book, so this person asked, after attending my pre-conference in workshop at the National Learning Communities Conference in 2024, that was last November, about 5-6 weeks ago, they enjoyed it and wanted to reach out with a few questions. So this is a biology person who coordinates STEM learning communities. And they've been considering some of the things similar to what I talked about. So we'll go into those details in a moment. One thing they started with, what do I teach each week? They asked me to share some of the instructions and setup of the project I have for students, and also with specific questions. So first step, this was part of my workshop, but the project for kids books, I go through these phases, aside from an initial proposal, which we'll talk about in a minute. We're going to go through each actual assignment, but just to frame this, the key pieces are: you need a script that identifies a problem, a character, and an arc, and the problem theory, and that would also say kind of the main content would be part of that scripting. So how are they going to work in the content of the other class? Then we have storyboarding, which allows for basic visual design, layout, and kind of a standard patterning, and it's meant to be a quick planning process step and scaffolded into a rough product that can be handcrafted or a digitally simple version. The rough product that we do also incorporates undergraduate research, eye tracking, and peer feedback, or eye tracking, peer feedback, all of the above. And then ultimately there's an optional publishing option that could come in the form of service learning. It could also come in the form of like pop-up museum style presentations of their books to each other and other campus stakeholders, the way some people will do like an honors portfolio showcase or something. But middle of the semester, if I do this option with any sort of presentations for my students, it would be like I'm going to have tables set up in one of the more popular, more frequented areas on campus. And my students are going to present during class time, kind of multiple times, and cycle through each other's presentations or stories along with anyone else who happens to wander by and want to do that. So that, the other part of optional publishing, aside from service learning, and that is legitimately trying to write a query letter and send this out to a literary agent, because there is room for these types of books. And you don't have to be an expert to publish a STEM-based kids book. You just have to have anchored knowledge. And if someone's going through an introductory chemistry class or an introductory math, college algebra class, and they put that in and they transform that content into a kids book, that's going to have a market. Right now, one of the main math kids books that I know of is like Circumference, and the students always think it's a little cheesy, but sometimes, or some of the students think it's a little cheesy. Others are like, oh my gosh, this is great. Wow, this actually helped me think about pi, but that's a whole other thing. Go look up Circumference. So let's jump into the bigger details. That's the kids book project fast. So let's go into the specific assignments, because that is one of the questions. Like, what does the actual scaffolding of this assignment look like? And so I'm gonna get rid of this. Because I'm actually, you know what, before I do that, let's just go and say there are reasons why kids book projects are good. Part of my presentation at NLCC had to laid out the production of knowledge, the transformation of knowledge into a product as part of our Bloom's taxonomy, and that by there's a beyond that, having them anchor to these nostalgic genres of or creative genres sometimes give them a sense of safety and comfort that may make the learning feel like it can seep in a little better. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then some of these other framings, like defamiliarization from Western formalists, says that when we recontextualize or rethink about something, or help others recontextualize or defamiliarize something, that it makes it more interesting, makes it more memorable, it creates a novelty to it, and then there's some other things we could go into. But that's the basic framing of this sort of thing. And I realized that my label is incorrect. It's not just Chem and English 101 in this, but I had changed it at the end of my last video that I tried to make, where I did not appropriately click the audio. So let me put this. This is the kids book projects inquiry. No one's gonna know, except for the one or two people who might actually watch this. We'll see. Greg, why are you so self-deprecating? I don't know. Moving on. With that, we are going to jump over and talk through this project, its location in the semester, for my LCs, and kind of how I work through this and how I frame it for students. So we need to get rid of this guy and go to that guy. So with that, let me see if do I need to make this just a little bigger, maybe. We'll try that because I like the look of that. Okay, this is the general outline. So this is it starts in week 5 and goes to week 11 for the whole shebang. Sometimes I will stretch this further. I have had it be a 7 or 8 week project in the past. There are reasons why I don't do that anymore, and why I also have it as a placement in the middle of the semester for this sequence. It should be noted that I teach writing. I pair this with math and chemistry thus far, and that's been a really fruitful pairing, I think. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. But so for framing this location in the semester, just to think about that before we get into the details, I have it start on week 5 for a couple reasons. Usually, if they're borrowing content from another class, this allows two things. They get past the initial first semester, first year struggles and learning curve, and figuring out where textbooks are and how to do some basic student things. And they also get past a little bit of content in the other course, and a little bit of basic content in my writing course, so we can start talking in a more advanced way and applying some of those principles in this project. It also allows them to get past an academic essay warm-up assignment that I do to make sure they know this is a college level class. Even though we're going to spend 6 weeks on a kid's book, I expect college level engagement, not kind of a floofy response. And so that kind of has to be anchored and enculturated in the first 4 or 5 weeks. So that's why I do that. As far as getting some of the content from the other course under their belt, that's a meaningful thing, because 4 or 5 weeks in is usually enough to get past a first exam in most courses, especially in the 2 courses I'm pairing with. Sometimes the first 2 exams, depending on if the first one was a review and the second one was new knowledge or whatnot. That's meaningful because when they go to do the first step, when they go to do the first step, they do a proposal. So this is a proposal and main character design for the kids book. So they know they're going to be doing a kids book. They know they're going to aim 5 weeks out for producing this book, and 5 or 6 weeks, and that this is designed to help them think forward and brainstorm 2 possible topics. So I think I say the topics have to be chosen from the Math 151 course or the chemistry course. So I think I say from the first 8 weeks specifically. That's meaningful because first I want them to choose 2 topics just in case. And then from the first 8 weeks means they just learned it or are just about to learn it in the middle of this process, but they are supposed to have mastery of the topic in that course before the book is due. And so that way it's not forcing them to kind of jump ahead in the course and learn something out of context and possibly wrong because they're trying to lean forward. Also, students don't like doing that in the first place, which is actually something that was brought up in the email. As far as one of the questions that I was sent was, do you do anything to make sure that the math or science students write about is at a decent level? We can see the possibility of students creating something that's very surface level, and it'd be nice if they were able to go into a bit more depth. Yes, and so let's engage with that, because this is where it would start. So the proposal stage is to make sure that that happens, that we get to something that's actually college level learning for them. Students will default to if you tell them write for third graders, and I usually do this for second to fifth graders with these kids books and game design projects, but students will default to, well, it's a third grader, so they barely know math. They need like basic addition, multiplication, subtraction, maybe fractions, maybe decimals. And so students do, especially when we lean into like who's your audience, and we use the design thinking process, which starts with like empathy and defining your problem and audience. They will lean into that, and they'll want to give them something that students in those third grade classes are already learning, which isn't a bad thing. Like, it's a good heart. It means that they're trying to apply the rhetorical principles and the tech comm principles and the design thinking principles that we've given them. However, we want the students to benefit from the transformation of knowledge, and we want them to think about how does this knowledge get transformed for that audience. So part of framing this project is telling them it's not about communicating the way you would learn in a college class. It's taking the same information, essentializing the concepts, and transforming and translating it for a third grader. And so to line that up, we will do a couple things. So this step is important. You have to transform content from this class. It has to be part of the outcomes, part of the content. You have to cite the content, and you have to pick 2 topics so that we can decide which one we want. And so the way I frame that is, for instance, medical rhetoric is emphasizes complex medical information and how it's communicated to often how it's communicated to patients or general stakeholders. And so we saw this kind of lesson come up during COVID, as far as like what is health information, what are vaccines, and the infographics that came out as far as COVID and other things go. We see it in other contexts too. The bottom line is, if you talk to someone and you want them to get the information, then you don't tell them as if they have a PhD in your specialization. So even though you could talk about all the different pieces of a technical thing, what you want them to understand is what the thing is and what they should do about it. And so medical rhetoric will usually target, and technical writing will usually target that sort of information. If they're writing for a general audience, they'll try and target it for like a third grade or 8-year-old, like a third grade reading level. And that, because it's not, we want to make sure that it's understandable. So we target based on the literacy level. We don't want language or literacy level to get in the way of really important information. And so that's the principle we start with, is there's a whole field of study where we see this practiced, or when it's not practiced, we see the bad things that happen when people don't communicate well. But we see tons of examples in medical rhetoric of why it's so important and what it means to transform and translate information. The other thing is, I use the example of there's a guy on the internet who teaches calculus to 5th graders, right? And he doesn't start with integrals and derivatives, right? He doesn't go through like moving the exponent around as a coefficient and blah blah blah, and using limits and all of that. what he does is he takes calculus and he essentializes the core components and or core mindsets. And so, a calculus mindset is, if we think about a common problem with calculus, like area under a curve, we go, okay, how do we measure area under a curve? We don't have a formula for the irregularity. So, the common way of approaching it is like we use columns. We use rectangles chopped up into smaller and smaller pieces, or a consistent thing. So we can say, okay, well, if we have this many rectangles of this many sizes, we can approximate area under a curve. That's a calculus mindset of like chunking into predictable, measurable things, the immeasurable, so that we get an approximate understanding of it. Althusser or Foucault would probably have a field day with that, but if you don't recognize those, then it's fine. Something about the, anyways, I'm going to get distracted. So I frame it for students that way. It's not creating a college lecture in a kid's book. It is transforming for a third grade reader the principles of that. And so the proposal starts here. So that addresses that. How do we frame it so that we get decent content and that the students in our class actually gain learning from it, right? So proposals for week one or first week of the project. They identified 2 topics. The other side of this is when they're doing this, I do allow them the affordances of AI in a very limited and specific manner. And so in this case, I do want them to describe what they think their main character is and use an AI generator to get some kind of concept art started. And this is a normal part of a design process with this type of work. There are caveats to how I let them use AI. For instance, the AI generation here is meant for this first step because it's not a class that is that has an outcome connected to art. So AI doesn't get to be used for anything that is part of the outcomes of the project or the learning. That's really important. I don't let them use it for idea generating on the kids' books either, because part of the learning of this and transformation, the learning through the process of transformation is stuff like that's part of the core of this project. So you shouldn't be going on GPT and brainstorming these, but that is part of my goals and outcomes. If your classes don't need that, you can use AI however you like. But this is one way that I allow them to use AI with very specific limitations. And I'll talk about more instances when we get to digital rough drafting. But in this case, it's about concept art. And so this step of grabbing a couple samples of what could be, now we have something to work with. And even if it's weird, but even if the art comes out a little odd, and this was done a year ago, so AI has gotten better. This is something that if I wanted to, I could throw in a program like PowerPoint, remove the background, and I'd have just the elephant, and then I could play with it and use it as a representative character and move it around a kid's book page. It's a start, and it gets them thinking visually and also playing with how specific a language do they need to get what they want from some of these AI things. So there's a little bit of literacy that is happening in communicating with AI-oriented things. That is that piece. So the next piece, we have scripting and then storyboarding and then rough drafting. This is all multiple steps process work. Writing research does show that a process over time, a recursive process of text creation and production is healthier and better in the long run, quality-wise healthier as a writing practice. So we break this up into chunks, and it also allows them to isolate competencies when it comes to writing or when it comes to planning. And so that allows them to focus and do a better job theoretically in each of these pieces. And every time I've added one of these process steps, I get feedback from our elementary school partners, which I'll talk about with the service learning here in a minute. That the quality, like they notice the quality difference every time I've added something from one of these process steps to the eye tracking. Again, some of these we'll get to. I do start, so I usually have scripting and storyboarding, and I've tried them in alternated order. So sometimes I'll do storyboarding first, sometimes I'll do scripting first. I've come to find that scripting first tends to lead to better quality than storyboarding, because the scripting process allows them to think through the content, how it's going to be used, how the math is going to show up, and to make sure that they're not just giving facts. Part of the scripting, and let's go there. So let's go. Okay, so we give them parameters that are based on standards of the genre and that sort of thing. But for the script, it is meant to be a rough draft. So I'm not as worried about sentence level grammar, which works fine if you don't have a pairing with a writing course anyways. It's less important that every single punctuation's right in this stage, and more important that the arc is there and the content is being used. And so part of this, for the genre of a kid's book, it has, we would talk about it as having multiple rhetorical purposes that have to be balanced. And so part of that is it has to tell us, it has to be interesting, it has to be entertaining, and it has to be informative or educational. Kids' books are often misunderstood genres or overly simplified genres. In perception wise, like students will come in and they'll think, oh, it's just a kid's book, and then we get them to pull apart what that means and what it takes. And I think kids books are one of the, if you do it right, like they can be one of the most complex genres for writers, where writers can display the many levels of proficiency in writing that they have, because they have to balance rhetorical purpose value, multiple values on rhetorical purpose. How do I inform while entertaining, while possibly persuading? How do I balance meaningful words and meaningful images and dialogue? Sometimes how do I cite my sources? And so we're dealing with the scientific. How do I lay out visual design? Both with aesthetic and cognitive uptake principles in mind, hence eye tracking. These sorts of things. So it becomes a really powerful genre. But when it comes to the scripting, I got off topic there. When it comes to the scripting, the important thing here is that we see them developing their story with a clear beginning, middle, and end, that there is an arc. I encourage them to borrow from two storytelling models we get in our content of the class. And one I have my own lecture on, and one I borrow a video on the hero's journey for, which is just like a 4-minute video. I'll see the link again somewhere else in a minute. And in hindsight, I should probably, for the sake of professional responsibility, have citations to these images where I got them, and I realize I don't. So I need to work on that. I have it in other parts of the course, so the students get it somewhere, but that doesn't mean that I'm showing them here, or that students in this place know where those came from. Okay, so we give them options for story arcs, and I actually gave in my learning communities presentation, I gave a handout with common story arcs, which can be used to jumpstart students, or just say, pick one of these. And then, especially if it's not paired with a writing course or something where that would be an outcome, like here's the important thing with this. You give the tools that don't have to do with outcomes. So if the outcome is learn chemistry, and you can do this in a standalone class, it means that you have to give all of the necessary supports on the writing side, so that they can kind of just focus on transforming the chemistry. And so you don't want them to have to really think through a variety of different story arcs, or think intensely about some of these other things, because those aren't part of learning outcomes unless you ascribe points to them, right? So that's one of the things that is a good thing to consider. Okay, so narrative arc is important. Here's where it can go wrong with students. So this is kind of the meta commentary as a teacher of this assignment. Students have two things that they struggle with, and part of the reason why I equip them with story here is for one of them. So we have full extremes. On one extreme, we get kids' books that emphasize the content. And so, like I shared a minute ago, sometimes students will present the chemistry or math content in like a this page, in like a here's the definition of an inverse function. I tried to put it in simpler language. Here's a picture of an inverse function and a fun little cartoon character. Ta-da! And they do that for every page, but there's no overarching connective narrative. Which means that it is basically a series of flashcards that are pretty, which isn't the genre of a kid's book. And so that there are kids' books like that have been published on geology, on like what is lightning, and there's no arc to them. There's a whole series of them. It's actually really cool, like the very meaningful, cool, interesting visuals. Each page has its own like kids level experiment. And I have all my kids' books in my office at work, which is why I'm not showing it right now. What a jerk. But that is not, so that is an extreme that we don't want. We don't want a series of visually interesting downloads of information, because that doesn't create the same learning or engagement, because each of the it almost feels like an encyclopedia. Each page can be a standalone text, like an infographic, and you don't have to read it in order or sequence. And there's no kind of building of understanding, and so, or scaffolding of understanding in that kind of setup. So that's one extreme. We don't want students to do that. We want them to think about how this story arc works. So we'll talk about things like personifying different things they're learning, and that could look like, if they're doing constant rate of change, they make it a crocodile. If they are learning about models of an atom, they personify, what are the characteristics of different metals? Are they more reactive? Does that mean that this character for francium as an alkali earth metal and reactivity or whatever is really volatile? And so like they're more prone to anger, and so the content is helping them deal with anger by chemical bonding or something, or is it proton, neutron, electron? One's a pessimist, one is kind of middle of the road objective, and the other is always glass half full, and we put them in a story to indicate the different parts of the atom. That's something they can do, and so helping them think through that arc, not just facts, not just visually interesting representation of facts, but really thinking relationships along the way is meaningful in this step. I encourage them to let the content be the driving force for story bumps, story tensions, story crises, and their resolution. So it's like letting, and there's you can use like the mentor-mentee thing where you have someone comes along and teaches this principle which helps solve the problem. You can use personification of elements and have them go through a journey that models a process. There's a couple different ways you can do it. But on one extreme, we have people who have no story and all content, but it's interesting, but it's not, there's no sequence to it or no scaffolding. On the other hand, we get people who get really into writing a creative story but don't engage with the content that they're supposed to be learning. And so that is a different problem, right? So because of that, we have to make sure that they are engaging with the content, that they are going back to their proposal, and that proposal starts out with something meaningful. Didn't mean to take this long on this step, but providing all the meta commentary I can. The next step has to do with storyboarding. I do provide students with a variety of videos, and I'm going to share this with the colleague who was asking. Actually, I guess I could put all of this or something like it in the comments in YouTube, or not comments, in the description. So maybe I'll do that. I'll put it all in one document and then share it so people have access to it. So I usually start with scripting instead of storyboarding, because if you start with storyboarding, it's harder for students to think through the big picture, especially if they're just trying to get work done. And so because they're just kind of drawing pictures, you end up getting a lot of the same, like, here's my character with some dialogue next to it, but no actual dialogue and minimal commentary. It can be good if the students lean into outlining well, but I found better results by having them script first and then visually, and then think about whether that script works, and then visually depict how they're going to lay the book out page by page afterward. They tend to have a clearer vision of what it's going to be, so it's a lot easier to visually depict it at that point. And it's basically a lo-fi prototype of a book. You can do it a couple different ways. Like there are fast versions where you can use simple shapes, like do cutouts, paper cutouts, or cardboard chunks or whatever you have lying around. You can also just do quick, usually storyboarding is quick hand-drawn sketches, and it's meant to be representative of, of the layout and the feel. So we start thinking about visual design, and also where the reader's gonna go, how the visuals are gonna help tell the story, all that fun stuff. This is actually a really good genre for people in STEM specifically, because like this is a process of lo-fi prototyping that engineers can use to help communicate and write technical documents, right? So it can be, and think about user interface or user experience. So it's one of those really nice crossover genres that, while it's traditionally used and we might see it in like the behind the scenes of Star Wars with like George Lucas and his creative team or something, or in cartooning or graphic novels, it actually works really well as a way of visually depicting a process of steps or a sequence of steps. I've used it in other ways to help rethink content, but we don't need to go through that right now. But suffice to say, it has a lot of potential in a lot of different areas, and anything that would have some sort of sequence or arc to it, or process to it. Oh, here's the hero's journey video that I have the image from Matthew Winkler and Kirill Uretsky. Is there anything noteworthy here aside from what I've already said? Students sometimes will over focus on the creative. They won't focus on the rough in. And so sometimes I have to walk through, like, some kids don't need a lot of detail to get the picture. If you say that that Matthew wears a red hat, and then every time Matthew shows up, he has a red hat. Like it can be a stick figure Matthew, but the red hat is the signifier that helps them identify that character as Matthew, and that's like very simple, straightforward, like representative, kind of abstract art a little bit. So it's storyboarding is not about the level of detail. It's about the big picture planning and arcing. And so the storyboards can be developed quickly as long as the things in the image aren't just a single stick figure or a single head, like that it's clear that there's a little bit of clarity in what's happening or who or what's being represented on that page. And you can always, and you don't even have to, like, if there is dialogue, it's helpful to lay out the page and say it's in this talk bubble in scribbles, and you just do a couple scribbles. You don't actually have to write out the words. The point is that there's text there and it's represented by scribbles. I give students a 6-frame storyboard blank and on one side, and a 2-frame storyboard blank. So 6-frame storyboard on one and then 2-frame storyboard on the other. I do ask them to write a sentence or two of description for each frame. And so that's why those lines are there. If they are trying to do full page planning, sometimes it does help them to, that's not what I want to do. It does help them to have the bigger frame instead of the small ones. If you're in class though, and you just want them to practice, you can give them a printout of this and say, go. And maybe they don't do it for every page, though that's what I have my students do. Maybe it's like the 6 big scenes, and that helps them think through the next step as they prototype. And when I say prototype, I mean developing the digital rough draft. I don't have a problem showing my text, my instructor text number there, because I let my students text me, and I also already have it on my YouTube channel if you needed to contact me with questions about this. You're welcome to do that. It's a Google Voice number, cell number, so it proxies to my phone. This step, complete digital rough draft of book in Google Slides. I use Google Slides for a reason, because the outcomes of my class focus on the composing process. Google Slides also, just like Google Docs and things, tracks the changes step by step, which means I can see if too much AI is being used or things are being dropped in or chunked in and not created by the student themselves. So I do like Google Slides for that reason. It is not as functional if the goal is a a pretty final product. And so if someone's really thinking about leaning into the end quality, I would, and you can trust them not to use AI, and that's not part of the, or composing isn't part of what of the outcomes for this project. Then using Canva is a better option, and using PowerPoint is a better option. PowerPoint's a better option for this if you're not worried about tracking how students build things, because it has a lot of access to free Creative Commons clip art that students can use a lot more smoothly. And so its search function for that, just, it goes a lot smoother. In Google Slides, part of having them track where they get their images and art from has to do with the ethical use of other people's work. And so that becomes part of the course that I teach. And so maybe it's not necessary in some courses. And so, yeah, if it depends on how you want to frame it or what you care about or what the outcomes of the course are. So I use Google Slides because it helps track changes. It also forces them into a place where they have to play with that technology, get used to knowing how to share, do share settings. And so there's some functionality that comes from on the technology, getting more adept as a 21st century writer that maybe not all courses need. In this case, one of the reasons I don't have them use Canva for my class is, or AI at this step, is I tell them they can use AI to create individual assets. But because the writing course cares about how they're composing the piece together, I don't want them to give me just one big AI generated like background page or scene and then put the text on, because they don't have to think about the visual design, page layout, and that sort of thing of each of the pieces. And I want them to. That's part of pulling it together, thinking about visual design, thinking about how the eye moves across the page and who their reader is and all that. So I don't care about the quality of the art. I do care about the composing process. That's a big step. That's an important step here. And I provide them videos on what storyboarding is and how, and I do talk through in class, and I do have a video on like quick digital rough drafting where it's really about like blocking in rough shapes to match the storyboarding. The other thing I have to be careful of with this is that they don't think a digital rough draft is take a picture of my storyboard that was hand-drawn and just put that in as a page. It's like, well, no, you can put that in as a background and overlay shapes and clip art for the representative pieces and add some layers and detail. We also talk about simple things, because it's first-year students, about using technology to change the colors of text, to do transparencies of backgrounds, to use some picture editing to remove backgrounds so that you have a little more ability to layer and foreground different pieces of the composition. So definitely a multimodal text. And yes, I'm kicking myself for not writing the book chapter on that particular thing, because I had to bail out of an edited collection where this was going to go, where the proposal had been agreed on, and I couldn't find the time. It happens. But having talked about it right now, I am chagrined. So, also, I just got an email from that group saying it moved on to the next step. So I am a little sad right now. Meanwhile, the important thing at this stage is that they are effectively and accurately presenting the math content. And so at this point, part of this digital rough draft may be that they are incorporating graphs or tables or things like that as part of the visual layout, and in a way that is effective, story appropriate, and so they can go through and present this content in a way that would be approved by our friendly neighborhood math professor or the other professor. It is also the place where they really need to effectively address the audience and the genre of the context by entertaining through effective story technique. So it is this balance of content and story, informing and entertaining. To go back to my presentation, as far as that goes, there is where did I have it? Come on now. Did I have it at the beginning? Nope, I don't. Well, that's not useful. There is a cool guy, Sir Philip Sidney, I believe, who says that basically the role of a writer, and it was in his Defense of Poesy, is it's from like the 1600s, and he said that we are to teach and delight. And so a kid's book is one of the core places where we get to do both, to teach and to delight. All right. Here are some optional things before we get, they are meaningful. So I usually use this point. You can see we've been stepping up fairly quickly. You can spread these out because there are a couple weeks in here where it can be helpful to kind of stretch this. But I do put in here a grade check or an individual conferencing about the project, so that we can make sure everything's on track after the digital rough draft. And this is also usually where I'm trying to get friends from ASU's Crux lab who specialize in eye tracking to come visit the class. They actually have brought their equipment to class before, had students read for the first time the rough digital draft of their classmates' books, and they've done eye tracking software to build heat maps and order of like sequence of positioning and all that fun stuff. And then they've talked through that data in the second half of class, doing kind of a 40-minute lecture with our students there. And so it actually was really amazing. We saw a drastic increase in quality, and it helped students think as 21st century writers with an eye for the audience and the kid audience. So when I can't have the ASU professors come in, we still talk about heat mapping and eye tracking and what are the common patterns, and we think through some examples in class. It's just really cool when they get to be part of that undergraduate research process. And so this is a really great, eye tracking is a really great way to incorporate primary data gathering and interpretation on in a first semester class. Again, they don't have to dive deep into it. They can just look at the heat maps and do some visual interpretation and that sort of thing. It's great. But so this is usually happening about the same time, but I also do individual conferences, and whether that's a grade check to make sure I'm up on grades, because it's not my strongest feature is my grading. But this is a great place to touch base and make sure that they're where they want to be. And all along the way, they have like either in class or online homework that they're being given points for as well. I call them the meme of the days, but it's basically just online or in-person lecture or content or reading or questions and discussion boards that are helping reinforce this content and the steps along the way and equipping them to accomplish each step effectively, and thinking also about what kind of big picture writing processes. This step I do have as a query letter. And this would be optional for people who aren't paired with a writing course. But a query letter is a great way for them to think about where this product and project is going. So if you're already having them share with little kids, that is really good. That is a alpha testing that not all writers get. And so they already have, like, their book is going to be tested in sometimes a stronger way than some other professional creative writers that are trying to put their work out there and send it to literary agents. What a query letter is, though, and they have resources on this about what it is, how to frame it, and that sort of thing. But here's the basics. It's usually short. It's a letter format, block paragraphing instead of APA or MLA. Here's the sequence that all those sources kind of lay out. And we emphasize their ability to summarize their story succinctly, to not lie about themselves or the project, and to value the market and provide relevant supporting information. So part of this is saying, what is the niche I'm filling? Because there is a market for kids' books. And so what I like them to do is basically go and find actual books, or we look at like 30 or 40 in class throughout this whole process, doing genre analysis, that kind of thing. You can also see my videos on the visual design of kids books. But the value to the market is also really good for people who are in engineering or have a little bit of a business entrepreneurial mindset, because it helps them think through, like, this isn't just a creative product. This is it is a product. It's not just a creative thing. And so it's possible that someone could write a book in the first year of college, or whenever they have this project that is publishable. And having them remember that and think about the potential there is I think a really meaningful practical thing. And thinking about like, okay, well, there are these 3 books on the market. This one talks about math, but but not the math that I have. This one talks about vampires, and my book's about vampires, or whatever. But mine does both. And so it feels a niche that both of these successful kids' books identify as valuable, because these are successful kids' books that relate to mine in different spheres. And so we could market it in either one. And so either in the vampire books section or the learning section. And so that's something that I want students to kind of walk through. This also means that while we get to think about kind of the rhetorical persuasive writing, which matters to me in English 101, but might not matter as much for a STEM-only learning community or a chemistry paired with some other class learning community, chemistry and like student success or something. Maybe you don't need this in that case, but there's some options. This also could be a really great thing to do if you've got a STEM-based kids book and it is paired with, say, a business class, which is not a common pairing because people don't think that scientists might be interested in this sort of thing. But that's a connection I'm stumbling into now as I verbal process. We're going to move on. So we have the query letters, we have the conference. These are kind of ways to incorporate kind of secondary thought processes, like and sometimes add some value. They definitely get meaningful feedback as we dig into their work. And they also, because the eye tracking is happening, they're getting feedback from me. They're getting an alternate form of peer review. And if I can't do the full eye tracking, sometimes I will say, like, go in and practice eye tracking from a qualitative self-reporting standpoint. Say, where were your eyes drawn? Then try and help the person understand, like, I was drawn here for this reason, and walk it out. Sometimes that reflective practice helps us give someone else meaningful feedback, but also helps us practice it as an awareness that makes us better writers and empathetic writers with a reader mindset, as we do for our own work. Then we get to the final revised version. So that is, everything's polished up as best you can. Again, the emphasis here isn't that the art is the best. What I care about most is that the page layout and composition as a whole accomplishes the blend of rhetorical purposes, and that it is a functional book aesthetically, so that it's generally interesting to look at, and it's generally using the tools that they have and have had time to develop proficiency in, and that it is generally composed in a way that can be cognitively interpreted effectively, so that the eye tracking, that someone doesn't have dialogue boxes out of order and text boxes at the bottom that explain what the dialogue was, something that happens before the dialogue above. So kind of those sorts of, is it functional? Yeah. So then we do service learning. With the service learning, I don't know. So I'm just going to leave it here for that. Here's the short version, or no, not the short version. Here's how we do service learning. One, at my college, we have a great service learning student life program, and they actually won an award and got it from the governor of Arizona, which is amazing. They're pretty cool. And I think this is the second time they've won that in recent history. It was pretty cool. But they help connect people who want to do service learning in their classes at the college to local community partners. And so they do some of that interaction work so that teachers can focus on the actual content of the course and the pedagogy oriented thing. So we have a really great service learning program that helps make those community connections. It's not the only way that can happen, but it's one of the reasons that makes it easier for me to do, because I don't have to go and do a whole lot of like rapport building and kind of selling the project to individual stakeholders. I don't have to get past the gatekeepers at an institute, at an elementary school, and talk to the principal or the dean or whatever it is. After an hour of failed talking and now 40 more minutes, my voice is getting a little dry. And I realized I don't have my water in here. That's not your problem, but this is what live streaming gets me. Apologies. So we start with, we have a really good service learning program. They've been very helpful all along. They'll help us make the connections. And here's how we do it for this and for my game design version 2. I usually have to connect at the beginning of the semester or just before to say, here's what I'm thinking about dates wise. Does this work for you? And I try and get that date locked in long before it shows up in my course. And I always try and build my course out from the beginning as much as possible, especially when I have these layers of complexity to it. Anytime that I've got that going on, I'm usually trying to plan a couple months out for that reason. So I'll send a message to the service learning and say, here were the people we talked with or have worked with in the past. And I have this many students and I'm thinking I'd like this many elementary students. So can you talk to the third grade teachers and the second grade teachers? Cause I think I've got enough students to warrant that size, or fourth and fifth grade teacher, whatever it is. So I tell them what I want, who I'm hoping to connect with, and what my tentative dates would be. And they go and they be the intermediary. On the ground, what this looks like is we partner with an elementary school that is basically an 8 to 15 minute walk, depending on how slow you want to go, for college students. We can kind of mosey, and it's basically across a really big gravel parking lot and a solar panel field, and then there's the elementary school. We can go and get our name tags and walk into their classroom. Alternatively, they can walk over to the college, and we can kind of reserve a big room if it's necessary. There are a couple different spaces that we work with. The rooms work with service learning in rooms to try and find a place to hold the event, and there are a couple places. The worst case scenario is I have had smaller groups just come straight to my classroom where students were already set up kind of around the room, but it can be really good either way. The reason I like that partner, we can do a variety of partnerships with service learning, but I like this partnership because basically if I have an hour and 15 minutes, I can spend a normal amount. I can tell students you're going to have a normal amount of traveling in and out, plus 10 minutes of wiggle at the beginning of class for people who show up late. And I still get an hour of solid service learning where whether we go there or they come to the college, we can set up in stations, and the kids can get anywhere from 3 to 6 kind of books in a room. And so my students get the benefit of multiple groups of practice, and we usually do somewhere between like 8 and 12 minutes per group. And depending on how fast or slow they're getting through the books and what the reading levels are of the kids. And so they'll work around, and we usually spend a couple minutes at the end letting the kids share out what their favorite parts of the story were, what they learned. They will do, one part of this is my students do print out their books. I encourage them, and we talk about like binding and writing technologies, and say like, no matter, like I've had them try and use tablets. Okay, let me do this. Side conversation about final product, connected writing technologies. I have my students think through the variety of ways that they could present their book. I ask them to print it out, and if it's a hardship, I ask them to let me know with a couple days in advance, and then I'll print their book for them. I've only had to do that once or twice before, but I'll bring in student samples of books that have just loose leaf papers and no page numbers, that have been hand stapled. Some that have been hand stapled but have a piece of cloth or duct tape over as a binding on one side. I have others that have been like Kinko's spiral bound, and others that have been in hole punched and ribbon attached in a couple different ways. And then one person had like a book binding kit that they got to play with and chose to play with. And that was pretty amazing. That was a pretty nice, solid final product about math and chicken nuggets. It was amazing. I have had students who are like, oh, I didn't print it out. And I'm like, I guess you could use your tablet. And here are some of the things to be careful of. If you use your tablet, it's a lot harder to give to students. You are more nervous about letting them touch the electronics. It's harder to do a presentation. It's just a different experience. But it's possible. And so that's an option. But we taught, since writing technologies is part of multimodality 21st century considerations, it is part of the content of the course. And so thinking through which of those and what the user experience with those might be, like the raw staples where you could poke your finger or something, nobody wants tetanus, versus the ribbons and the look and the feel and all of that, whether there are page numbers or not actually matters, because if the binding goes away, like that's a problem, because now you've got 15 papers and the story gets out of order and you're handing kids individual sheets and it's awkward. And so that becomes students have reflected on their process of production too. All right, end side conversation about that. So the service learning, we usually have our students set up in stations, and we try and get it so that they have 2 to 4 elementary students in their groups. And I'll talk about layers of reading in a moment, because I think that was a different question that was in this request. So I've talked about the stations. Framing the service learning. Okay, I'll come back to that, because I think there's a specific question I'm going to answer, and I'll share more of that in a minute. The last piece here is the rhetorical self-evaluation of their own kids' book. So this is students going back and looking at their work and saying, so this is where we incorporate a more traditional essay at the end of this project to be an evaluation, a rhetorical evaluation. And now rhetorical evaluation for an English 101 course is pretty standard. Doing it on their own work is a little different, but it does sometimes make it a little easier to work with. I in some versions of this, like the one I use with chemistry, this version was a reflective, rhetorical, and aesthetic evaluation of the kids' book, and it was a bit more substantial. They are supposed to use like an APA format. I do ask them in this version to write 1,000 words, and they're supposed to quote their own work, the student experiences, eye tracking, as evidence, and I have them cite sources from our class and use screenshots or images of their piece. And that's also true when I do it with the math version, but it is a shorter essay because of everything we've got going on in that course. I do like the 1,000-page evaluations better, but that was a longer arc to do it that way. So but this does help them get back into the mindset of academic writing and framing before they go into the last project, which is a more intense paper, traditional paper, a little more traditional paper for some classes. But I'm trying to get them to draw on their experiences with the kids and reflect on those lived experiences as qualitative data. Sometimes we have numeric, like quantitative eye tracking data or heat maps that I want them drawing on, or if not, like thinking about what that changed when they realized or what they saw in the kids. So all of this is part of the reflective practice of writing, and I call it an evaluation because they are supposed to say to what degree they did effectively or ineffective, or wrote effectively or ineffectively. So they can't just say, I did this. It's not just a reflection or a, here's what I did. It's pushing into evaluation. Here's what I did. Based on this criteria, it wasn't as good as I hoped, or it was better than I hoped because of these X, Y, and Z data. And you can kind of lean into that as far as you want, depending on the courses you're pairing with. When I do this with an English 102, it's definitely closer. It's a much heavier version where the writing is more. And I usually ask for academic research and research from the course about writing and rhetoric as well. And the longer word counts get people outside of the traditional 5-paragraph model, which is less effective in the first place once you get beyond 700 or 800 words. Okay, that is the last step for, so the rhetorical self-evaluation is the last step in this. I do have them review like different parts of an essay, so I give them those videos. And along the way, they're getting content about polishing and structure and paragraphing and kind of standard writing content too, as well as resources on APA formatting and analysis and evaluation and stuff. That is the sequence. So what do they do each week? They do that. Do you do anything to make sure that the math or science they write about is of a decent level? We talked about that. How have you incorporated service learning? We talked about that. Then the idea. I was thinking of a reading to kids event, perhaps one early in the semester where they just read to them, and then another later in the semester where they read their own books. That is amazing. I love that. It's a really great strategy. And just for context, like in high school, I had 3 years where I was the president of the Storytellers Club, and we did those sorts of events as high school students for second and third graders. We'd have them. The whole class would come visit the school library because high schoolers we couldn't leave the campus the same way, and for some reason that was a thing they wanted to do. Whoever was organizing it, I can't remember now. But in that case, we had 5 to 8 storytellers in the club, and so we would basically take turns reading 10-minute stories, either that we created ourselves or that we just grabbed a kid's book, and we were practicing kind of oral performance storytelling rather than just the writing in that case. And so there was a little more emphasis on that. And there are trade-offs here. So some of the benefits of this sort of service learning when it's by itself, if it's like I'm just going to read the kids' stories, and this is something I talk to and train the students for. So I train our students to try and put the elementary students in the active position sharing the story. And so that means they have to anticipate literacy levels a little bit, and I have to provide strategies. So part of the training for this is I have to provide strategies for them to adjust to different literacy levels, because it's real tempting to just read a story. And that sort of thing. I'm going to put this, I feel like I don't want to just stare at this background. So do I have anything that's at all interesting? There we go. I'll do this, because why not? Okay, I have something, I might as well use it. So for this section, when we are talking about training students for this type of work, especially when it's a literacy activity oriented course, or when we're trying to do more than just kind of share a story, which is good. So we have a couple benefits generally no matter what we do. First, part of the training for students for service learning is you are a mentor to these second to fifth graders. You are an adult who's taking time to do something with them. And for some, and maybe it's my own personal thing because I grew up with a single mom and there's a lot, for a variety of reasons. My mom's amazing, but, first I know that for some kids, that the adult interaction is less. And so for a variety of reasons. And so telling my students, your presence and your willingness to talk with them is a meaningful thing to an 8-year-old. Like, you are an adult who took time to care about them and to look them in the eye and to smile at them and to give them a high five, a handshake, or fist bump, which is another part. Like, I always make sure, like, if they try and give you a hug, shift it to high five or fist bumps or handshakes or whatever, as much as possible. We also have some basic training working with kids of like, don't make promises about the future. Just give them generally affirming things. Tell them how cool they are. Ask them questions about their life and get them talking. Kind of draw them out. Make them feel seen, heard, acknowledged, that kind of thing, and understood. And so that's part of the training. And so some of it's just basic interaction and the meaningfulness of this type of activity. So when you are starting with that basic reading event, that's one of the things. Like, this is an adult who took time to read to me, and that's a fun story thing. And that's a great literacy support. And if it's tied to science-based books, that's even better. And so we've got these layers of benefits that come from this and the service learning involved in it. The other side of that is, like I said, the literacy component. So here's what I tell students when training them for the literacy component. First, put the kids in the active reader position. If you've got a kid's book, part of that is putting it in their hands, not reading it to them, but reading it with them. One of the benefits to increase reading from the research is that the social bonding component of kids reading with adults or parents or whatever people in their lives, like that is the thing that makes long-term readers, that makes reading have this nice memory to it, this nostalgia to it, and encourages them to keep reading. It allows for a release of all kinds of the happy chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, because of that social bonding and novelty of the story and all of that. So there's some fun biochemistry on the cognitive science, education, or psychological, I can't remember it, that whole thing, that I try and encourage students to keep in mind. So that social bonding is important. Having the elementary students, which sometimes I call little friends, and I call my college students big friends. I have started asking the kids if they want to be called little friends or Pokemon or something else, and they'll usually say they want to be called Pokemon. It gives me a chance to kind of warm them up and say, what kind of Pokemon would you want to be? And it's like 60% are Pikachu, that kind of thing. So, man, tangents. Putting the book in the kid's hand is an important thing, and having the group small enough, if possible. Like if you can get 2 to 4 students or even one-on-one, that's really good. One-on-one is a little more work for students who are uncomfortable at that close intimacy level. But having a 2-to-1 is actually really good. Step 1, get them into smaller groups. It's really great. Put the book in the hand of the kids, and there are some strategies based on literacy level you can use. First, if they seem like they're going to be good readers, you can say, I want you to, like the college student can say, okay, why don't you guys take turns reading, or I'll take turns reading with you. I'll read the first sentence and you read the rest of the page. Or you guys take turns reading, you read a page, then you read a page, then you read a page, and then we'll cycle back. It's like hot potato reading. If the students can read effectively at that level, then that's good. You can keep doing that. If I tell the next layer down is, let's take a turn with each sentence if they're slower readers, because then nobody feels like the bulk of the slowness, and they get a chance to think and process, and as they about the language they just read each sentence as they pass the book along. And then the lowest level, if you have readers who are really just getting started, you can start by telling them, like, I'm going to read, but I'm going to give you one word. And every time you see THE, right, those letters together, you're going to say the, and I'm going to stop and wait for you to say it. And so you give them, or DOG or CAT, like you get one word that's repeated, and you have the students say that word. And so I'm reading through, and every time I hit that word, I wait and I look at them, and I'm running my fingers. Sorry, you can't see this. I'm running my fingers under the lines of text, all that fun stuff. So I teach my students to do this as they read, to run their fingers under the text, because that helps with literacy development and vocabulary recognition and visual to auditory processing. So yeah, it's a literacy strategy. So even if they're not reading their own books, that's a really great thing to do in both contexts, because the goal is to make it a positive social bonding experience and increase the literacy levels of the kids as well, right? That's part of the fun. Or it could just be fun, and you could have them read the stories, and that's fine. But students tend to, the kids, little friends, tend to be more active and more engaged when you get them reading some of it. Even if some of them are shy, getting them to read one word is really not that big a lift, unless there's some serious, maybe one time in multiple years we had a kid or two with so strong a social anxiety that there was just nothing happening. It's been so rare. Most of them are already in a class with other kids. They're used to kind of sharing. And so even if they're a little bashful or introverted or have a little bit of social anxiety, it's usually not that big a lift to get in a small group like that, to get them to read one word, if it seems like they're really struggling. And that's part of the process of developing that skill. The last step, and I probably should have said this when I talked about planning the learning community or the service learning, is because of my outcomes and this being paired with writing, I do have my students spend the last 30 seconds to a minute at least of their time with a particular group, creating a 2 or 3 frame storyboard, drawing the pictures of their favorite scenes from the book as a mnemonic activity for the elementary kids. And then I have them ask the elementary school kids to write a couple words or a sentence underneath, so that we aren't just giving books to them, we're also asking them to draw out and visually process and then verbally process by writing out. So this layered level of cognition and memory that accomplishes the science outcomes or the math outcomes, as well as mine as a writer and literacy professional, that kind of thing. So with that, let's check and make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So as far as sequence goes, I love that. Oh, that's what I was going to say. There was a reason why I came to social bonding. Having 2 events with the same kids is great for a couple reasons. Because at the beginning of the semester, especially if you don't have much attrition in your college classes and students tend to stay and persist through the semester, and you're not doing a lot of drops or withdrawals, doing that in like a week 3 maybe, and then moving forward and having a book another share in week 7, 8, 9, or week 10, that's really great because it creates a relationship. And so it gives tangible visual data to the college students that allows them to better aim at and target that audience with their kids book, as they try and have audience empathy and figure out whether they want to talk about robots or panda bears or whatever. Something from that first experience, just interacting with the kids, will inform the design of their own kids book. Absolutely. It's also, from a social bonding, it creates 2 relational community building points between the college students and their little friends. And so it becomes something that if they can get the same people in the same groups both times, you get a stronger relational reinforcement, I imagine, from what I know about community and that sort of thing. So I see it as being a really great idea. Yes, do it. It's awesome. Any advice or resources you would be willing to share would be great. I'm going to send them to you. I also forwarded some resource from Canal Lab ornithology that reminded me to reach out to you. I do find it interesting. I'm going to show it in just a minute. Do you give the students any examples of kids or science math books? Sometimes I will give them examples. I'm going to, for other people's sake, I'm going to show the other thing you gave, if I can find where it went. Actually, no, it's right here. No, it's not. That's not it. Hold on. Let me pull this apart for a second. That's not it either. Okay, so before I answer that last question, let me get to... Nope, okay. I'll get there. I want to show that example that you gave because I did find it really cool. I think I can do it this way. Okay, let's do it this way. Yeah. All right. So this is Build Science Literacy Through Storybooks. This is great. I really like this. And so yeah, I would definitely encourage this. There were some cool webinars. I was in Kenya, so I couldn't attend that online, or coming back from Kenya and that sort of thing. But yes, this is great. Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I love it. It's just amazing. It's right in line with what I like. There are some other groups that will also send out things like this from time to time. And so this is great. I give students a ton of examples of books. Some of them, and they're all from my own collection. Like my wife and I have developed a collection of kids' books from when we have 3 kids, and yeah, that was part of it. They're teenagers now. But some of them are science-based, some of them are math-based, and then some of them are just general kids books, and some of them are counting and numbers types. Some of them talk about volcanoes and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variety, and I try and give them examples across the board. So yeah, I think that answers that. I love these sorts of resources. I still think there's not enough kids books out there, that especially ones that teach, and they're such a good, like, you can get really fine-tuned. And I think sometimes people are like, you can't teach physics in a kids book. Like, no, but you could teach like force normal. You know, physics is too big, but you're looking at like it's the processing of the text, and we want or the of the content. It's like you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in until the content can fit the genre, right? So, you know, you could take one snippet of one lesson and turn that into a kid's book. For what we do, it's usually a little more in depth than that, I think, but it is very much a meaningful thing as far as that goes. I think that's all the questions that I read. I think I answered them all. I think I got all the random stuff out too that I could think of that are relevant to this project. So altogether, generally this is the process I use. I'll send these materials, I'll kind of gather them all, even if it's in a bit of a messier text document, the pieces, and I will attach them to this video and email this person. Yay. I'll go ahead and share, since I'm here and I've already taken the time to do this and I've got things up, I'll go ahead and share some of these other pieces that I use for science or STEM-based LCs. Just in case it gives some ideas. It doesn't have to do with the kids book, though I really like that. So now I'm kind of shifting, and this is where in the video that failed, so now I'm going at like 2.5 hours now. In the first hour video that had no audio, I had the banner changed. And so I'm going to go change this banner now so that I can, just in case I want to snippet this piece separate. And this is going to be STEM Chem ENG projects. Yeah, just in case. So let's talk what we do here. So if you were only interested in kids books, you can switch. But since I'm already doing this, I want to be able to like chop it, and I've got everything up. So I might as well just talk through this other assignment. So I have a household products collage that we use for our chemistry class. I also use it in math, but in a different way. I always try and start with a collage project. This is really good because it's like a form of data gathering that's a really light starter, but it does technically, in my mind, count as undergraduate research. They're data mining their own house, and they're taking pictures of the household products or chemicals around. And so for this, they'll create a collage of 15, 20, 30, depending on what the semester is, pictures of products, labels. And so this could end up, they take a picture of lotions, hand soaps, bath products, cleaners, cereal boxes, spices, or things in their garage, like, you know, things of oil, transmission fluid, that kind of stuff. And they take pictures of the labels, and they and we can talk, and so then they draw those all together. And this just helps them become aware of the products around them. In the chemistry side, it helps them become aware of where chemicals are stored, how they're stored, and what kinds of products are around, or what counts as chemicals. So it's a really great awareness building for that. From a writing standpoint, we get to talk about the difference between the different pieces of labels, like the aesthetic side versus the informational side, and how some of those visual design components work to draw a consumer to purchase versus inform a consumer on how to use. And so we get to talk about those different rhetorical products or rhetorical functions. And so it's a really great awareness building activity that can happen fairly quickly. And then we roll it in as a first draft to a polished essay about that thing. And so this is a great way to deal with knowledge of science, to deal with kind of that fear of chemicals and that sort of thing. And if you frame it correctly, it helps people see, you know, you can have that conversation from the science side of what is chemical or rhetorical danger. You can think about on if you're thinking from the chemistry side, in this instance, he would talk and frame it with like proportions of and whether like healthy proportions of chemicals versus not. We usually get the jokes of like H2O2 versus H2O also, that kind of thing, and how one's deadly and the other one's just water. And so we talk about if you call something water as an ingredient versus dihydrogen oxide, it kind of gets past that. If you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't put in your body, because it's just a language. So there's a little bit of fun that can happen here if you frame it right. If you don't frame it right, it can be a way to reinforce conspiracy theories about chemicals in your home, and that sort of thing. But that's neither here nor there, and I'll let you decide what you want to do with that. But the product ends up being a really nice analysis project that starts with an awareness building and then pushes beyond that to what is the sociocultural context, the rhetorical context of these products? Are there political requirements or governmental requirements that change the labeling? Is the labeling visually effective considering the level of danger it could have? I use the example, and I have this in one of my videos that presents this project to the students, but at one point, I had a hydrocortisone cream and a toothpaste that had almost the exact same visual design. One was just a smaller tube, but they had the same colors, the same layouts, and they were just sitting, and it was late at night, and they were both sitting on the counter, and I picked up one instead of the other. Didn't actually use it, but these are some of the things, like, is there something with the way we design visuals that can account for user interface, user experience? It's a great thing to consider with product design and all that. Moving forward, we've got that as an essay. We've got the kids books with service learning, as we've talked about. We also have that evaluation of the rhetoric and aesthetic choices. In the chemistry class, we do this blog project, and we've had a couple different versions of it, and it shows up on Rewriting Chemistry WordPress. So this let's go to the main one. So this we have a WordPress we have students post their things to. And we've been doing this since 2016. Writing science in everyday contexts. And so we've got posts that did a couple different things. So 2016 to 2022 is when we were actively posting, because we haven't run this LC in a few years. Enrollment for the chemistry class was challenging. Some things to keep in mind, some things that are cool about this. We had 3 different versions of blogs that we had students do. One, the first sequence had to do with transforming chemistry content into everyday life. So translating it for a general everyday audience. That's where we started. And so we have people explaining in December 2016 and that sort of thing, trying to draw connections, and we told them to set up their comparisons a certain way, talking about heterogeneous, homogeneous mixtures in cooking, and so talking through what that looks like, contextualizing it in an everyday thing, and we wanted them to practice this multimodal text and learn some things about code, or a little bit of like HTML code and that sort of thing, and spider bots, I can't remember. But that was the first iteration. The second iteration was the chemistry of writing technologies, and we had people do projects that were really cool, that were like, why is a tattoo gun a writing technology, and which kind, and how does the chemistry of the ink work? And so that was a really fun, that's on here. I think it's in like 2018 or 2019. So yeah, we had some different things with different types of technologies in writing and chemistry. And the last one we did had to do with this project, which is a science literacy struggle blog. And so for this course, we decided to shift. It seemed like an appropriate one. I think this was 2022. But basically it was, think about yourself and the people in your lives, and what makes like the way science is communicated a challenge. What makes digging into knowledge harder sometimes. So science is not always communicated in a way that's clear to audiences. So again, leaning into that principle from medical rhetoric of we could talk about this at the PhD level, but that doesn't mean the patient is going to understand, right? Or the person that we're trying to communicate this with is going to understand what they're supposed to do, or how it works, or why it matters. So there's, if we aren't explaining it clearly. So we had them kind of do this reflective blog a little bit more, where they thought through science literacy struggles. And we had them do a little bit of research, analyzing the struggles to communicate science in their own personal daily lives. And so they were to examine What makes learning and understanding science particularly easy or more of a struggle? For whom in your everyday lives is understanding the work of scientists in the world more difficult, and why? And what recommendations can we make to help others learn to decode science more effectively? So the student writing about this and posting and making that an essay and going to the blog. And then finally kind of making a video final reflection, an analysis of their own awareness of science and its impact on their own part of society, their own life. And so yeah, so we have them kind of working through that idea of science literacy. That's a really fun one. I will say that as far as the WordPress blog goes, one of the cool things about this is that at this point, since 2016, it's got over 60,000 views. We've got from over 150 different countries around the world. And this is all student writing. Like the views are going to students trying to transform and make chemistry content more accessible or think about it in a more tangible way. And so it's really kind of cool to look and go, that's a byproduct of first-year college students in an introductory chemistry class, and its impact, and their writing is impacting. And so it's kind of neat. Yeah, so I think I'm going to stop there. I think that's all I have. I think I answered all the questions and decided to cover this since I was here. I need to gather all the materials and post those and send the email for this. But a video is a good place to start. If you have listened through all of this, thank you for listening, and I'm sorry. Have a good day. Since this is the week before Christmas, enjoy your winter break as it is. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.